You're listening to Members of the Jury, the show that takes you straight into the trenches of justice, where the passion, players, and consequences are real. Each episode, we examine current events happening in the system. From the battles in courtrooms to the streets demanding reform, we bring those stories here to you, the members of the jury, because we aren't afraid to take it to the box.
What's up, members of the jury, and happy Freedom Friday. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to another episode. Today's episode, in my opinion, is really going to highlight not only what I'm hopefully envisioned that this show has been doing since its inception, but really give an insight as to why it is that criminal defense attorneys do what we do, why there is a need for us to do what we do, and how us doing what we do leads to a better criminal justice system. We've had prior episodes kind of about this where individuals answer questions as to, they're always caught off guard, like, how can you defend those criminals, those rapists, those murderers? And, I have to assume that when people ask that question that they don't really have any firsthand experience with the criminal justice system, and that the opinion that they're forming about it, not only the system, but for criminal defense attorneys, is really based on second, third, fourth, and even fifth hand information, or they're really into Hollywood true crime dramas, which doesn't always depict criminal defense attorneys in the best limelight. However, fortunately for us, our guest today has had two recent conversations with a bystander and a client that will truly illuminate just exactly how important it is for criminal defense attorneys to exist and to do what they do. And I'm really excited to get into those conversations so that hopefully there's even a greater impact on the audience listening today. So joining me today is defense attorney Natalie. Natalie, please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Natalie Hull. I am a criminal defense attorney in North Central Missouri in a town called Chillicothe, who likes to claim itself as the home of sliced bread. I have been a criminal defense attorney for 12 years now. Started out as a public defender for 10 of those years. I've done post-conviction relief, appellate work, as well as trial work. So I've seen it from start to finish, if you will. And criminal defense, I'd like to say, is all I've ever wanted to do. But when I went to law school, sadly or secretly, I wanted to be a prosecutor. But then I interned at a public defender's office and I never looked back. And that's why I think it is important when people ask me how I can defend, quote unquote, those people. It's important to answer the question, not in a sarcastic or snarky way, but in an open, honest way. And I feel comfortable answering it because I had such a shift of my own in law school.
That's really interesting. And I kind of want to follow up on that a little bit. What was it about, your upbringing or your experiences going into law school that led you to even have that desire to even be a prosecutor? Because there's plenty of people who just go into law school and don't even really know what type of lawyer they want to be. So I'll first ask you, what was it in your life experience that led you to want to be a prosecutor? And then I'll follow up with what caused that change.
Well, I've always had this very strong sense of right and wrong and fairness. And going into my legal career, I had this what I would call naive thought that everyone knows what the laws are. So if you break one, you should be punished for it. But that first summer, interning with the public defenders, I very quickly learned it is not black and white. There are so many shades of gray involved in the legal system. And I didn't want to be the person that looked at things as black and white. I didn't like that idea. The first case I worked on was somebody who I didn't think was guilty. And then I watched him plead guilty because he was too scared to go to trial, and he got a really good offer that would get him. It was a murder case, and the offer would have him out someday. And it was very shocking to me to watch that happen. And then after that, I left the public defender internship and went to a prosecutor internship. And there it was, all this black and white. And I like the way I felt, and this, I'm not going to paint all prosecutors with the broad brush, as easy as it may be. I felt, at least in this office, that these prosecutors spent their time seeing the bad in all of the defendants. And that's just not who I wanted to be. I love that as a criminal defense attorney, my job is to look at the good in every single one of my clients. And I have found over these years, it is not hard at all to find the good in these clients, regardless of what they're charged with, regardless of what they actually did. It is not hard at all to find good in every single person we come across, except maybe a prosecutor. And that's I'm just saying that tongue in cheek.
I really, really love that. And I feel like that's such a true representation of how criminal defense attorneys, whether private or public defenders, operate. One of the things that I say time and time again to my clients is, look, you're before a prosecutor who doesn't know anything about you except for the four corners of the instant police report and the four corners of your rap sheet in the event that you have prior convictions. And that is all that they're using to judge you, to define you, and say, this is who you are. And so part of the case, facts and allegations aside, are to inform the prosecutor and the court as to who you are actually as a person. And so I really, really love that right away, that was your viewpoint and played such a significant role in your legal career. I did want to ask though, what was it that drew you to do a first internship at the public defender's office with that initial desire to be a prosecutor?
It was the only place that took me at the time.
Fortunately, and I've expressed this to plenty of my mentees, is that honestly, interning is the best way to find out if an area of law is right for you or not. And kudos to you for even, despite liking the opportunity at the public defender's office and seeing what it is, still going and pursuing the route at the district attorney's office to really find out what side of the aisle best fit you. And so, I know that you talked about how early on in your career, after kind of doing those internships, falling in love with the defense side and starting your career as a public defender. How long did you do that for, and what caused the change from public defender to private defense?
It wasn't anything really fun. Being a public defender kind of in a state system comes with some political things that I didn't necessarily agree with. And it really became time to go out on my own and see what I could do. I miss it very much. 95% of my cases are contract cases with the public defense system. Basically, I still have a public defense caseload. I just have fewer resources at this point. It's just being a paralegal, and my paralegal is a retired attorney, so she actually used to be my boss. So we're still serving the same populace that we have served for years. I just get to sleep in later if I want to and take days off without asking permission, except of the courts. But I do. I miss it. I miss the collegiality. I miss the collaborations. And I would tell anybody that the first job you should have is being a public defender. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting to me how each state has such a different public defender system and how it operates. And I think that's why there's this inconsistencies with what people think of public defenders and how they are as attorneys and what resources they have. And I think it's really unfortunate. I've always said it in these episodes. I really hate where people who, especially the first timers and those who don't have a lot of experience with the system, cast doubt on a public defender's ability to adequately represent them. And, you always have to take a step back and explain that, we all pass the same bar. We're all the same eligible to practice law. And, like you alluded, there's certain pros and cons to being public defenders and even private attorneys. And it just kind of what suits your practice at that time. So what an incredible story. I would encourage any listener who wants to connect, as Natalie and I have, to please reach out to me. You can contact me via email at lhirsty@membersofthejurypod.com, or you can also connect with me on social media at the username of Members of the Jury. We're on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and X. And so if you or anybody who wants to be a guest, you want to connect, you want to tell a not guilty story or highlight a policy issue, please reach out. That's how Natalie and I was connected. And I think it's time for let's get into the conversation, because we on this show have had the philosophical conversation about the societal stigma as to how can defense attorneys represent these horrible people. And one of the ways that Natalie and I connected was she actually expressed publicly of an interaction that she had with a stranger at a coffee shop, which included this dialogue specifically. So Natalie, why don't you give us an insight as to how this day started, how this conversation started, and we'll discuss how it evolved.
Let's see. I go to the same coffee shop every morning. I live in a small town, and people, I don't know, I'm by routine. And I pulled up to the window and just got to chatting with the barista. Her name's Kaya. And I just started my practice this past year, and I talk a lot about it so that people will refer folks to me. And I had mentioned to her that I was a criminal defense attorney, and just through some sentence, it came out, I just don't know how you can do that, because I just don't think I could represent guilty people. And in my head, I just thought, here we go. And I looked in my rearview mirror. There was nobody back there. And I said, well, do you want to have the conversation right now? Because I'll tell you how I do it. And she goes, yeah, sure, I have time. And she's actually the manager of the coffee shop, I think. At least she acts like she bosses everyone around. And I'll tell you now, we've become really good friends. So, because this was a few months ago. So yeah, that's pretty much how the conversation started. And I kind of have a standard response that I say to people, there's a few variations to it. When I have people that are very aggressive, I like to say things like, you can go to bed tonight, not, unafraid that the police won't barge into your house just to look around, because a defense attorney, protects you from violations of the Fourth Amendment. And they usually kind of look at me and I'm like, that would be against illegal search and seizure. And they just think, wait, what are you talking about? I'm like, hey, if we didn't have that Fourth Amendment and defense attorneys defending it, then, police, law enforcement, anybody could just bust down your door and just come looking and searching around your house if they wanted to. And so I usually say that one I didn't have to say it that way to her, but I do that sometimes to the really rude ones. Then with her, it was, do you watch crime shows? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, let's talk about some of these folks on the crime shows. What if they, and let's say they're guilty. What if someone who's guilty of stealing or even guilty of murder is charged with murder in the first degree, but what they really did was like murder in the second degree? Well, a defense attorney's job is to make sure that maybe they're only convicted of what they did do, not what they're accused of doing. And so, we kind of talked in depth about that. And I did use the crime show concept to her a bit. We have a prison in our town. It's one of the 2 women's prisons in the state. So we have a lot of connection to, I don't want to say crime. There's a lot of prison guards that work in our town. So that has some influence over the population here. But then like stealing is a really easy one, because in our laws here, stealing over $750 worth of something is a felony. Less than that is a misdemeanor. So that's another one that's easy to explain. Well, my job is to make sure that they meet the state meets their burden of how much the item was worth. And then another one that we like, and I actually fought this one in my appellate days was, is it replacement value or is it actual value? And by the way, it's actual value. You're welcome. And so, yes, that's, and I kind of was explaining that to her. So maybe they are guilty, but are they guilty of what they were charged with? Then I shifted into, and I like to talk about, well, now let's talk about sentencing. That's the other part of an attorney's job, is to see what is fair. What do we argue? Is this, is a person, okay, I said to her, do you remember the cartoon Aladdin? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, do you remember the song? Gotta eat to live, gotta steal to eat, tell you all about it when I've got the time. And she's like, yeah. I said, well, do you think Aladdin should be, like, what type of sentence do you think he should get?
I love that.
Well, what do you think his defense attorney is going to argue for him?
Right.
Is that the same as somebody who's stealing just to get, who's stealing for a non-survival reason?
Right.
Or do we say, well, Judge, this is an Aladdin baby. They grew up thinking stealing's okay because it's in the song. I don't know. I've never used that as a mitigator, but I mean, it's an idea.
No, but I love that too, though, because I mean, like you're right. Like, so much of crime, and especially dealing, with public defenders and that background, is that we're representing indigent clients. And, one of the things that most statistically true in America is that you are born into the socioeconomic class that you will remain in for the rest of your life. And that is at no fault of your own, right? You don't control what social economic class that you're born in. And so I actually really like that phrase of a Aladdin baby, and or synonymous to just being born poor, and the life and choices and experiences that you have are 100% different. And I couldn't agree with you more that someone who steals for life necessities should not be compared or seen similarly to the commercial burglar who's stealing money or diamonds and things of that nature, even if they're trying to claim that they're doing those for a different survival purpose, right? Because that could also happen. But to me, those aren't necessarily the same. And so I really, really like that analogy, actually. And what I love about this story so far is, one, that you had no hesitation to have this conversation through a drive-through, because you can never really plan out when you're going to have some of the most impactful conversations that remember and that sit with you, whether it's, by a drinking fountain, in an elevator, through the drive-through. So I really love that. And I think that, what I also love is that through this conversation, despite having, kind of polar opposites opinions at the beginning, that through conversing and communication, you guys have been able to maybe not necessarily change each other's minds, but find common ground, see common schemes, and have a friendship blossom out of it. I mean, my goal for this show is to hopefully have that similar situation on society, and their viewpoint as it relates to not only the criminal justice as a whole, but essentially our clients, or the individuals who are processed through the criminal justice system, because there's not enough voices advocating for them. So I'm already loving how this story is starting.
I'll tell you, she gave me permission to share this. Again, smaller town. I'm driving down the main street of town, and I know her car because it's bright green. And I'm driving down, and I see her car pulled over with police, pulled over by the police. So I immediately turn my car into the parking lot right there, flag her, and say, signal to her, do you need me? And she kind of shakes her head no. And then I guess, how you raise your shoulders in a shrug. And she comes over to my car real quick. And that's when, and I rolled down the window and I said, do you need a lawyer right now? And she was like, no, I mean, it was a car accident. And her husband comes over and he tells me something that I'm not going to share. And I said, okay, here's how you handle this. Here is my card. And this is what you say and don't say. As they ask you questions, this is what I want you to say, but this part I want you to hold until I need to talk to them. And it's so funny because then her husband turns to her and says, man, when you told me you had a lawyer, I didn't really believe you had a lawyer like this. And so
I love that.
Yeah, it's funny because now she gets it that we come in handy.
What do they always say? Like, most people hate lawyers till they need one, or something like that. But how great is that like within like such a short turnaround of having this illuminating conversation, she finds herself in a potential situation where, knowing a lawyer, getting the advice of a lawyer, even having one on retainer is beneficial. Whether or not it necessarily blossom into a criminal charge or something like that. I mean, that's also an aspect of having a lawyer, is that you can get ahead of things and you can prevent them and you can mitigate and you can minimize, and so that things don't actually get to that level. So that is such a fantastic little twist. I want to go back to the initial conversation that you guys were having, though, in the drive-through. When you were giving her these examples and the analogies, did you feel as though she was initially receptive of them, or pretty defensive in the whole, well, if no, they're the police don't make mistakes crowd?
Oh no, I felt that she was very receptive. She is not of a very high socioeconomic class either. I mean, she works in a coffee shop. And I mean, she's 35 years old working in a coffee shop. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to pass a judgment. I'm just saying, she can't be making a lot of money. And we're living in a small town, and she has friends who've had difficulty eking out a living and doing different things. And this is the Midwest. Every single one of us knows somebody who's been affected by meth addiction. So of course, we all through that have some form of distrust for the law. Just as I just think that's a fair thing to say. And we should, let's be honest. And no, I think she was very receptive to it. She also loves crime shows, like I said, and 1 out of 5 crime shows talks about actual innocence. And then she did lead into that. She said, well, I mean, what about, are a lot of people innocent? And I think my response was, God, I hope not. Because then I went into explaining how, clients that are innocent are the scariest ones to defend, because what if we lose, right? And I don't know if this is an unpopular thing to say. I haven't said it around our crowd very often, but I have said I should lose every case. If the system is working right, oh, your eyes just got big. If the system is working right, we should lose every time, because that means the right person got arrested, the right person is getting prosecuted, and they are getting a proper and just sentence for the right crime. Of course, we know that's not happening. And if we're going through the appeal, we should lose the appeal, because it all happened perfectly. And if we're going further than that into the post-conviction, all attorneys should be effective and everything should be constitutional. I mean, if the system is right, we should lose every time. But of course, that's not how it is. And with the innocent clients, that's the scariest.
Absolutely. And I just couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I think I might have, I feel like I definitely referenced it before on one of our prior episodes, but that advice was literally the first piece of advice that I got after, as an intern, I did a bench trial. I felt my client was innocent, but it was a juvenile bench trial. So you're not going to persuade a judge if they think that probation would be in the best interest of the child. And I was really upset about it. And my mentor and supervisor at the time literally said what you just said, that look, like, we are supposed to lose, assuming that the police did their job correct, the prosecutor did their job correct, and the judge does theirs. And ever since then, my answer to the question of, like, how do you defend people charged with crimes or whatever horrible reference that someone wants to put on someone involved in the system is like, dude, I'm like the referee. I'm making sure that the police played by the rules, that the prosecutor plays by the rules, and the judge is playing by the rules. Whether or not my client did or didn't do what they're charged with, that actually isn't of my concern, because everyone loves to think that defense attorneys are just in it to get their client off on a technicality. But a technicality isn't playing by the rules, right? Because on the opposite side, when our clients have technical violations of pre-trial release or probation, they're not getting any sympathy. They're not getting any leniency because it's a technical violation. And so neither should the freaking government when they're charging people with crimes. And when I tell people that, have gotten very positive feedback, because although people could have a very difficult time doing what we do, I think they are all on board that nobody wants a system that is comprised of putting innocent people in high percentages in custody or giving them criminal convictions. And so the fact that you also have that viewpoint, I think that that is really a good standard to look at things. And I can see why it's an unpopular opinion, because in a weird way, it's contradictory to the presumption of innocence. But I've always said too that probable cause is the kryptonite to the presumption of innocence, because once an officer has probable cause and can place somebody under arrest, society is going to think, well, that officer didn't make a mistake until we do our job. And as we've seen, especially in the last few years with the implementation of body-worn cameras, police aren't always telling the truth. Police objectively lie in their police reports. And it should just, with the more eyes on body-worn camera now, I would like to think that that also illuminates why we need defense attorneys. And so let's go back to the conversation. It seems like she was receptive and she understood your analogies. How did the conversation come to an endpoint? How did you guys realize that there could actually be a friendship that blossomed out of this conversation?
Well, there was one other thing that we kind of talked about the guilty client. And, one of the things I told her, well, there's two things that I told her. I said, one, I don't know if my clients did it or not. I don't ask them. I mean, unless it's something that's absolutely necessary in the workup of the case, I specifically tell my clients, I am not your priest. I am not your doctor. I am not your therapist. I don't need to know. My job is to look at the evidence, to weigh the strength of the evidence, and to advise you on what I think will happen if we go to trial. That is my job. And so I explained that to her, and I explained that to others. I'm like, because they say, if you know they're guilty. I don't know if they're guilty. I don't need to know. I mean, unless there's a specific reason to ask what happened, I tend to avoid that. I tend to stay away from it. I mean, if I do know, it doesn't change anything, but I don't know. My job is to say, here's how they're going to prove these elements. This is what I think a jury's gonna hear, or what the judge is going to do during a bench trial, those types of things. And so that's part of that was part of our conversation. And, you talk about the first piece of advice you got. Well, the first lesson I learned was that this system is not based on truth. This system is based on evidence. And you see glass shattered on the ground, and there's water there. And if you were to put those pieces of glass back together, they would form a drinking glass. And then you see a cat walking away from it. There's an assumption that the cat knocked the glass of water off, right? But we don't know the truth. We just know what circumstantial evidence shows. And so that's what our system is. And I don't have to ask my client, do you know who knocked that glass of water off? I don't need to ask him that. My job is to say, this is what the evidence is. A jury's going to infer, because the cat prints walk away from that and none lead up to it. Like, that's how it's going to go. Or at least that's my opinion. Hey, client, you decide. But that makes it something to say to people as well, is I don't need to know if they're guilty or not to defend them, because everyone has constitutional rights. And they're considered innocent until a jury decides, or a judge decides that they're guilty. The word guilty doesn't apply until a jury says it. So that part of it was said. And then, I mean, she was great, because she just began nodding along, and then saying things like, oh, that's great. I like that. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense. And then, ever since then, I go in every day. That's how I liquidate my assets. Oh, I have a usual. This morning, as I pulled up, she said, oh, we've had your drink started since we saw you at the stoplight. So they just know.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And we chat every day. They ask how things are going, how are my cases going, where are you driving to today? Because I drive to 10 different counties around here. And they ask me for legal advice, and I ask them for music advice, for things to listen to on my drive. So it's kind of neat.
What it illuminates is that, especially if she's into true crime. I mean, one of the biggest true crime podcasts that took over the country was Serial. And I think that that is an excellent point to your, point regarding circumstantial evidence, how, the country was really split on that specific case, because some saw the circumstantial evidence leaning one way, others saw it another, but it all came down to who were the 12 jurors on that case. But then as we see, because that individual not only had the right to an attorney through his trial, the right to an appellate defender, arguably hired an attorney to write a habeas, he was able to get the just verdict and overturning of his conviction that he deserved. And so I just really love that, the use of examples that you had, the willingness to confront the negative stigmas against hers. And I want to say kudos to the barista too, because it's really easy to have those type of hard dug in positions on such a potential controversial area, to be open-minded and to be receptive of your examples and your point of views. And, I don't know if she feels differently than she did before, but to at least give you that time to explain yourself and the respect to hear you out, that's really all we can ask for from us, because so many other people just shut down that notion of, everybody should actually get the benefit of their constitutional right to an attorney.
Well, and what I kind of see it as part of my job, part of my duty to have these conversations with people, because they are our jury pool, our potential members of the jury. I don't know about you, but if there is a case that I'm going to try where I think the jury may get angry with me because they think I am arguing a technicality, and so they think, which I'm not a big fan of that technicality language, but hey, jurors know it. I may voir dire on it. I don't know how y'all pronounce that. Some of us pronounce it voir dire. Anyway.
That's a tomato kind of thing.
Right. So, I may ask it during jury selection, and every person that I am able to spread the message to about why we do what we do, and that we're protecting our clients from being charged with the wrong thing, even if they're guilty of something, we're trying to protect them from being, found guilty of the wrong thing, then maybe that's one less person who's going to be pissed off at a defense attorney for arguing something specific, something technical, for asking for a lesser, or for just saying he's not guilty because this one element's not there. And that you've promised that you will find them guilty of, beyond a reasonable doubt, and make the state prove every single element. And when we ask, is there anyone here who's going to hold it against my client? If you believe or you feel that I am arguing a technicality of the law, then, maybe that's one less person that's going to raise their hand. Now, sometimes I go in trying to get a mistrial by blowing the jury panel. But regardless of that, these conversations that we have with our potential jury pool, they then talk to other people. Hey, I had this really interesting conversation with a lawyer today, and she said this and this. And then they'll talk to somebody, or it passes on. And I think that these are important conversations to have because of who we can reach that way.
I think that's so fantastic. And, I never really thought of it that way. I really like having these conversations when I can with strangers. I actually welcome that question. What do you do for a living? I'll tell you. I'll get the judgmental, like, how do you do that? And I'm like, cool. Like, we're going to see how this goes, because I'm going to let you know exactly why I do what I do and how I do what I do and the importance of what I do. And some people shut me down right away. Other people are receptive. And, for me, I've always just thought that would be beneficial on like kind of a personal level. But I really like your thinking of like how you never know when that person that you've had a conversation with will appear in a jury, whether it's on your case or a different case, and now how that conversation is going to affect them, how they're going to interpret the evidence, how they're going to receive certain arguments from defense counsel and the government. And so I think that that's such an extraordinary thought process, Natalie, and just I think it's really beneficial. And my hope was that this gets out to as many potential jurors as possible so they can hear that insight and have that perspective change, and really do due diligence and serve justice in the event that they do get on a jury. So I just love how all of that came to fruition, and how that developed. And, we had an opportunity to speak before we started recording. And you actually were informing me that shortly thereafter, you actually had a different type of conversation circling around similar topic conversation, but that one happened with actually one of your clients who wasn't necessarily talking about aspects of her case, but why she was hoping for a favorable outcome because of what her future goals and desires would be.
Yes, actually, it was a juvenile client, so her case wouldn't affect her career moving forward. She informed me that she wants to be a prosecutor. I scowled at her, but she told me she wants to be a prosecutor because she doesn't think she can defend guilty people, which was funny because we were about to walk into admitting what she'd done. And I said, well, we've got some time to talk before we go to court. And I kind of explained to her generally, in simpler terms, the idea of why defense attorneys are important, that not everybody's guilty. And I don't use it in a but some people are innocent aspect. And I used her particular case. She was charged with property damage by hitting a vehicle, but this vehicle had already had damage to it. And so we had to argue she didn't cause all the damage. Had she been accused of charging all the damage, it could have been the equivalent of a felony if she'd been an adult. But it was a misdemeanor. And I was trying to explain, do you see how a defense attorney is beneficial? Because it protects you, or having a defense attorney on your side protects you from an overcharge, if you will. And I ended it with, look, if you're going to become a prosecutor, just don't be a bad prosecutor. Keep stuff like this in mind. Remember your experience here and your amazing defense attorney who explained this stuff to you and showed you how important it is to take things like that into consideration. So that was funny. And she's, after we finished her case, she said, I'm going to call you later and maybe we can talk some more about being a lawyer. And she's 18, so she's not 18. When she's 18, I might put her to work doing filing as an intern or something to really get in her head.
And I also just see that as such a beneficial conversation. And the crazy thing about it is how, despite being actively involved in the criminal justice system for something that may or may not have been unjust, for her to feel that way is such an interesting perspective. And obviously she's entitled to have that. But kudos to you for saying, let's take a step back. And you can absolutely be a prosecutor. No one's saying don't be a prosecutor.
I told her not to be a prosecutor.
But I think you're also hit the nail on the head. If you do, be one that's ethical, that's in it for the right reasons, that isn't trying to be overly bureaucratic. And that's why I personally like dealing with newer, younger, well, it's hit or miss, because either they're overzealous and they're trying to climb their bureaucratic ladder, or they are really empathetic and they're trying to implement justice and reasonable outcomes. And they haven't been jaded by the older attorneys in their office who have been there for a long time, who have seen repeat offenders, who have seen horrible crimes and all of these things. And, that's where I'm at now with my practice, where, I've been doing a full felony calendar for a while. And I just really feel that some of the judges that are always in there negotiating and some of the more senior prosecutors, when you get into a habit of just conveying offers of felonies and strikes all the time, it becomes so vanilla and just part of your day-to-day basis. And I've said it on a few occasions, why are we passing out felonies like they're pieces of candy? When people don't have prior criminal history, when the the extent is questionable as to what is it past that felony threshold or not. And it's just, it is pretty disheartening when people are just shut off to, mitigation, to hearing things out, when they're stuck in their ways of defining and judging people by the four corners of the police report. And so hopefully your advice to your client definitely sinks in to the point where she does not become a prosecutor, but in the event that she does, that she's one of the good ones. And so I really, really appreciate the insight into those conversations. I think that you have done a fantastic job of not only highlighting to the members of the jury by way of this podcast, but by those specific examples and individuals. I think that you have done a very, very just service to the defense bar, to private and public defenders, to the criminal justice system. And that's the type of advocating that I think needs to be done outside of the courtroom if we're ultimately going to have even more success in the courtroom. And so I just really want to give you those kudos and those flowers because those are very well deserved. In the show notes, I'm going to attach Natalie's website. That way anybody can learn more about her. If you're within the Missouri area and you want a fantastic criminal defense attorney, obviously she's the one to go to in that area. And so feel free to check her out, send her an email. And just Natalie, I really appreciate you giving us those insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Any chance to talk is always fun.
The last question that we always ask our guests on the show, whether it's in the courtroom or in a coffee shop drive-thru, what's the significance of taking matters to the box?
The significance is that, for me, I'll tell you this. Almost half of my practice is adolescent defense. And we're actually trying to get away from using the word juvenile. So that's why I'm going to call it adolescent defense. And the significant thing behind taking these cases to the box, even though they're not jury tried cases in Missouri. You said earlier that judges don't really listen to the weight in a youth case. They just didn't give them probation or whatever. But that child, you have that hearing, is watching you. And you are the person standing up in that courtroom fighting for them. You are their voice. And every time you say objection, you're saying for that child, you're not treating me right. Be nicer, do right. And you are fighting for that kid. And that, to me, to show this kid and any client really that they are worth fighting for, you might be the first and only person who has ever done that. And that, to me, regardless of the outcome, truly is the importance.
Damn, Natalie, that just gave me goosebumps because that is the essence of, I think, why most of us do what we do, to give the client that baseline level of humanity and representation. And in a situation where you are being accused of a crime by your state or federal government and all of their powers and all of their authority and all of their resources, few and far between do our clients have anybody in their corner aside from us. And I couldn't agree with you more that fact alone is why you take matters to the box, not only to actual trial, but why you defend your practice and what you do in the coffee shop drive-thru or in the mall or in an elevator. And so that was so beautifully said. I really, really love that. And just thank you so much again for giving us your time, your insight, for changing the world one barista at a time. And we wish you nothing but success in all your future endeavors. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Well, members of the jury, that's our show, and I rest my case. Be sure to come back next episode as we take another matter to the box. If you're a fan of the show, go ahead and subscribe. You can also find us on social media at Members of the Jury. If you want to be a guest or have any feedback, be sure to email us at lhursty@membersofthejurypod.com. The information in this podcast is provided as general reference work as a public service. The audience is advised to check for changes to current laws and to consult with a qualified attorney on any legal issue. The use of this material does not create an attorney-client privilege in any fashion with the podcast, the host, or the guest. This information is for educational purposes only, and no one affiliated with the podcast may be held liable for any decision made based on this information.